I have a love-hate relationship with sport video games, to say the least. First of all, let me start off by saying that I understand the appeal of these games, and I'd say that I understand better than most actually. When people first get into video games, typically in their childhood, they usually have one game that stands out to them more than others that they play more often. For earlier gaming generations, it may have been one of the pillars of Nintendo, such as Super Mario Bros. Or Zelda. For new generations, it may be Fortnite or yeah, pretty much Fortnite. Well, when I was growing up, I was lucky enough to have 3 games that had that sort of impact for me. NCAA football, Madden, and NBA Live, eventually replaced by NBA 2K. Every single day when I came home from school, I would load up one of these 3 games and play them until I couldn't anymore. Whether I was building the greatest dynasty of all time with the University of Michigan, or making the most ridiculous playbook I could in Madden, or creating a basketball team full of unbeatable superstars named after me and my best friends, I would always be able to find something new to entertain myself in these games that kept me in front of the TV for hours at a time. Sure, I had a few other games for my Xbox growing up, like Halo and Tetris Worlds, which is a very underrated game by the way. But sooner or later, I would always gravitate back towards the sports video games. I had an affinity for sports growing up, and even though I was never too good at the physical aspects of those sports, I always felt that strategically I was ahead of most people, as far as understanding and implementing the strategy involved for these sports. And these games presented me with an opportunity to prove that to both myself and to others. I would always take pride in my victories and look at my defeats as an opportunity to learn from my mistakes. The turning point for my fandom of sports video games came with the introduction of My Crew in NBA 2K10. I loved My Crew because some of my favorite modes in sports video games involved creating a player and building him into a superstar from scratch, like in NCAA's Road to Glory mode or in 2K's My Career. Since I was never going to be a star college football player or an NBA All-Star, it was cool to be able to put myself in the shoes of a virtual one and play out an entire career in the span of about a month, and then start from scratch when I was finished with one player. However, my absolute favorite thing to do in these games was to compete against both my friends and opponents online. And with the introduction of My Crew, it was the first time that I was able to do both of those things at the same time, and I was hooked from the start. Once me and enough of my friends were online, we'd get in an Xbox party and play game after game. At least until we got too frustrated with dealing with all the lag spikes and server disconnects. Even with all the problems that came with the My Crew games in 2K10 and 11, none of it was enough to deter us from playing it regularly. Then they chose not to bring back the mode in NBA 2K12, and although they had different versions of My Crew for NBA 2K14 and 15, I didn't play any of them, choosing instead to focus on My Crew mode, until the introduction of Pro-Am in 2K16. Pro-Am was basically a reincarnation of My Crew mode, but this time with reliable connections and gameplay, leading to an overall better experience. As much as I loved 2K at the time, my experience with the football video games wasn't going nearly as well for me. Things really started going downhill when NCAA football was discontinued after the 2014 edition, and I tried to transition to playing Madden more often. I didn't like Madden as much as NCAA football, but I figured that going from one football video game to another wouldn't be too bad. And for the first year while playing Madden 14, which was actually called Madden 25, but to avoid confusion, I'll just call it 14, it wasn't. Sure, you had your goofy glitches and unrealistic animations, but that's just something that you deal with when playing these games. The real issue came up when I got Madden the next year, and realized that all of the same glitches and animations were still in the game. As a matter of fact, I couldn't find any noticeable difference between Madden 14 and 15. It felt like the exact same game. Why would I spend $60 on a new game that doesn't make any improvements on the previous one? Well, that's an easy one to answer. I don't. And I haven't bought Madden since. Every year I'll try to play a game to see if it's any different, and it never is. So with the death of NCAA football, and my epiphany regarding the low quality of Madden, the only sport video game passion that I had left from my childhood was 2K. I was still mostly playing the My Career and Pro-Am modes. I enjoyed putting the time in to get enough VC to improve my player and get his overall high enough to get to the point where I could do whatever I wanted on the court with my player. Although it felt sort of grindy to get to that level, the end result was ultimately satisfying enough. Only it wasn't an end result. Not really. Because once you reached the skill level that you wanted, you only had so much time to enjoy it before it was time to buy the new version and start all over. So all the time and effort you put into the game is suddenly meaningless, and you're back to the same repetitive grind. The end of my passion for sports video games really came with the release of Rocket League, because that game provided all of the positives of sport games from a gameplay standpoint without any of the negatives, of which there are many. But I suppose I should start with any gamer's true best friend. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept, RNG stands for Random Number Generator, which is basically a longer way of saying luck. RNG is one of the worst things that can afflict a game because players generally want to feel like they have full control over what happens in their game. And any aspect of RNG, no matter how small, takes control of the outcome away from the player. In basketball games especially, RNG can rear its head in many different ways. For a jump shot, if you don't get a perfect release, then you have a chance of making the shot and you have a chance to miss. And all you can really hope for from there is that you get lucky. In defense, you wait for the right time and then try to steal the ball, and your player might get it, and they might get called for a foul. Same thing if you try to block or foul, who knows, push Y and let's see what happens. Madden's no different. If you've played Madden at all, then I'm sure you've been in coverage on defense, read the receiver's route, and you managed to jump the route perfectly right when the quarterback throws the ball and you go in for an easy interception, and then they drop it for no reason at all. Well, I guess you just got unlucky. Sorry, better luck next time. I could go on and on about the different instances of RNG that you can find in all sports video games, but if I did, then this video would be longer than it already is, so we're just going to move on from this point. Those of you out there who are defending sports video games in your head might be thinking something along the lines of,
well, you don't need to worry about luck as much if you just use better players.
And if that was you, then thanks for bringing in my next point. I always found it annoying how in sports games, you had to limit the selection of teams or players that you could use if you want to have a fair game. If somebody's using a worse team and you don't want to give yourself an unfair advantage, then you have to use a worse team too, which limits what you're able to do in the game. And if they pick the Warriors, then you might as well turn the game off and go outside because you already lost, honestly. The disassociation between the skill you possess and the skill that the game allows you to convey was most apparent in my favorite game mode, my career. There isn't much that's more frustrating than going into a Pro-Am game or a My Park game and knowing that you're less likely to win because their players are 99 overall and can do literally whatever they want on the court, while yours is only an 85 overall and you probably had to sacrifice an overall ability in order to focus on one skill to make your player competitively viable in the first place. I'd rather play a game where the only element that determines your success is how good you are at the game.
Okay, but that's not even a valid complaint because you can fix all that yourself after working for it. Or you can even fix it immediately if you want.
Dang man, you're still here? Well, while that can be a fixable issue, the only two solutions are things that gamers despise in the games that they play. The implementation of stale and repetitive gameplay in order to artificially elongate the time that a player spends in the game isn't by any means a new trend. However, it has been increasing in prevalence over recent years, as shown in games like Destiny, Anthem, and Assassin's Creed Origins. In just about every sports game there is, when your player starts off being as bad as possible, unless you want to pay your way to the top, the only way to improve your player is to play game after game after game, and to go through mundane practices, slowly improving your player until he gets to the point where his ability isn't a hindrance. And let me tell you, there isn't much that's more annoying than trying to win a game with a giant handicap in the form of a really bad player, and needing to play game after game in order to arbitrarily increase your skill. This problem also affects the ultimate team modes of sports games. You start off with a team of bad players, and you either have to buy better players, or you're forced to play with, and probably lose with your bad team time after time until you earn enough in-game currency to obtain the team that you want. If I'm going to have to grind out a lot of time in a game, I'd rather that grind be because I need to improve my own actual skill at the game, instead of just putting in enough time until the game allows me to be good. Despite all of my frustrations with sports video games, I mentioned that there are some positives with the games, and there absolutely are. Sports are perhaps the most popular form of entertainment on Earth, and the ability to recreate those sports will always appeal to some people, regardless of any flaws that may come along with those games. Even now, they still appeal to me as well. It's just that the cost and the overall experience of these games make it so that it isn't worth the purchase in my opinion, but it honestly wouldn't take too much to change that. First things first, stop making people buy the same game every year, and for $60 of that. If major competition-based games like Overwatch and League of Legends can satisfy their players with only one edition, then there's no reason that sports games can't do it as well. Most other competitive games only require a one-time purchase, and some don't even need you to do that. If those games can get by without making customers waste $60 every year to buy the same game under a different name, then I'm sure the sports games can do it too. Next, please make sure that the skill of the player is more important than the money that they put into it. This is especially critical in regards to the development of an esports scene. The FIFA series shows exactly why this is detrimental. They might get good viewership, but one scroll through the FIFA Reddit page and you'll see that the fans aren't all too happy with the product. Instead of a genuine skill-based competition, FIFA esports fans are subject to a contest of who's willing to pay more for victory. where your own skill is less important than the players that you're using, in addition to all the other issues I mentioned before. This decision is made in the interest of money, but the esports scene is slowly deteriorating as a result. Games like League of Legends, Dota 2, and CSGO have been around for years, and they've never once implemented a pay-to-win element to their game. It's for this reason that they have perhaps the 3 biggest esports scenes, which have become very lucrative in and of themselves. The sport-based esports will need to emulate this model if they want to emulate their success. And finally, please don't make the game unnecessarily grindy just to serve as an alternative, or punishment, to those who don't want to spend extra money on the game that they already bought. If they're good at the game, then just let them be good at the game without any restrictions. So basically, I'm just asking that they put the player's best interest before the bottom line, which I don't think is asking for too much, right? Right? Thanks for watching.